What's up? This is the Cultivate and Keep podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man as a Christian. This is Corey.
Jeremy and Max.
That's right. This is Jeremy. We got Max here too. What's up, Max? Shout out to Maximus. And thanks for listening. And we got a fun topic for you.
Max is my dog, by the way. In case
oh yeah, that's right.
You don't know.
Yeah, no, Max is not on the podcast. He's currently trying to hump Jeremy's leg, actually. But
we gotta teach him a little bit.
Yeah, you gotta teach him some manners, dude.
Yeah, working on it. He's
Max, you're in public, dude.
Come on, man.
Anyways, you want to give us a quick shout out on what's new, and then we can dive in.
Yeah, I just wanted to. What am I doing? Oh, yeah.
You gotta sound inspired, dude. How a listener is gonna be inspired to
I'm a
give
little
us a rating or
distracted
review?
from Max.
That's true.
Max, tranquilo. Hey, wanted to remind you and plead with you to
Plead.
Yeah, not plead. To request.
Beg.
To request to go write us a review. You know, we are working on growing the podcast and kind of getting our name out there. So anything helps. You know, preferably a 5-star review would be awesome. You know, leave a quick comment and just say something kind or whatever. Just give us honest feedback. But we do want reviews, so if you could do that, that would be great. And then also wanted to mention again Patreon, a way to support us. So we have a few new supporters. So Kevin Miller is one of those.
Shout out to Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, if you want to support us, that'd be great. And if not, no worries. But that'd be cool.
Cool. Actually, I don't know if I mentioned it. Stop me if I did. But the podcast numbers. So the verdict's not out on June yet because we don't have that because we're recording in June. But May was our biggest month ever by a long shot, actually.
Yeah, I don't think you shared it on the podcast. But
no, so the podcast has been growing steadily. So actually, I mean, just like thank you, everyone who's joining us, who's listening in, who's sharing it with friends, talking about it, you know, on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook, wherever it is. But we're pretty much, it's funny, like the vast majority of podcasts don't get over kind of a certain amount of downloads. And then it's like very uneven. You have like Joe Rogan, right, who has like the single largest audience of anyone in the world. I think he has like 6 billion downloads on all of his podcasts collectively. Yeah, which is just like ridiculous. And then you have you have a lot of like top tier podcasters, you know, celebrities, well-known people, you know, whatever. And then you have like hobbyists, kind of like us, who usually don't get over, you know, certain podcast marks. So, but I just want to mention, since we started, we're pretty much in like the top 10th percentile of podcasts based on benchmarking data that I've seen. Even though they're not like huge Joe Rogan numbers, the podcast is growing steadily. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it's good. They like us, I think.
I think we're just gonna keep trying our best. And you can always email us suggestions at cultivateandq.com. Anyways, today I wanted to talk about, I just sort of had some thoughts, and Jeremy, I can kind of bounce them off you. We can talk about them, but 5 realities about money and your career. But basically, you can think about it as like, I don't know, myths. I don't know. I forget where I sort of started, but I was listening to a podcast with a guy named Ramit Sethi, who's a really smart guy. He's written a couple books that sound really scammy, but they're really not. They're really practical. And it kind of just spurred this in me. But I want to talk about 5 things that I feel like I held on to for a long time, or that maybe I didn't fully understand and grasp. And now I feel like these are the things that are like really close. So anyways, we can just kind of go through them.
Cool.
So the first one is that the best way to get out of something is to not get in it in the first place. And what I mean by, I don't know, when I thought about it and I wrote it down, I always hear about, you know, like, what do you do if you're X? Or, you know, we listen to a lot of other like financial kind of podcasts, and it's like, how do I get out of student debt? Or what happens when my house is underwater? Or what happens when, I don't know, you're in a bad place in your marriage, or your career, or you don't like the job? It's like, well, to be honest, if we had to go back, maybe the best solution to this wouldn't be really any solution at all. It would just be, don't do this in the first place. And it's not that helpful when you're going through something, but it's helpful when planning and thinking about your decisions for the future. And that there's literally so much that can be avoided by just not doing it in the first place, or not getting yourself in that place at all.
I feel like that's advice that like would piss me off. Like if someone gave me, you know, it's kind of like when you're younger, like, you know, you get in trouble or like you're talking back with your parents and your dad says, or you say, why not, dad? And he says, because I said so. Like along the same lines of like,
Yeah.
just doesn't sit well.
It's like, okay.
You don't, that's not really helpful. Like that's not what you really need to hear. But I think you made a good point about like before you're in the situation, like you recognize this, I think once you're like in a spot to where like you don't want to be in, like hearing that isn't helpful. But I think ways to like curb this, like ways to basically not be somewhere you shouldn't have started in the first place. Well, I think one is like run it by someone, like obviously like friends, mentors, people that you're close with. Like if you have an idea or whether it's a career, whatever it is, like run it by someone. Keep people in the loop because they can say, hey, you know what, probably not a good idea. And if like if you're not doing that, well then you're probably going to be blindsided by a lot of poor decisions. I think another key way is like seeing the mistakes others make and try to avoid those, you know, and like not doing them. And then also like seeing those you admire in your life that are ahead of you and watching what they did and like try your best to replicate that, I think like those three pieces like could be super helpful.
Yeah. I think another one too is, like when you're looking at other people's lives and you're thinking about what you're doing, like know what you're getting yourself into in the first place, like don't just walk in blind or just think I'll figure it out later, or this is how everyone else does it. Like really do your homework, know what you're getting yourself into, because then you don't have to save yourself from this path that you've gone down or this thing that you've done. If you'd only known, you can't go back, but in the future, again, it's helpful because in the future now you don't have to make those same mistakes.
I feel like there's a lot of gray area, like with other topics, but with your money and with career, I don't feel like that's very gray. Like it's pretty like,
it's pretty black and white.
Do your research, figure out like what, whatever you're considering doing, like what is realistically gonna turn out to be, like, research that and then make a decision. It's not like there's only so much speculating. I feel like, it's pretty black and white,
Yeah. I don't know if there's enough thought and attention and like focus on doing things the right way the first time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, sure, like we're young, we have a lot of chances, there's a lot of time to figure things out, but also you can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of those chances and, favors you have to pull by just doing the right thing in the first place. And that could maybe be an excuse for, taking a long time to decide or being really kind of worked up about what your decision is or kind of what you're going to pursue. All this was kind of spurred from a quote that I heard from Charlie Munger, who says, nobody survives open heart surgery better than the guy who didn't need the procedure in the first place. So anyways, just a little bit of a reflection of in the future, what can you avoid? And even like right now, like, is there a change of direction or something you can do so that you don't have to be in the situation of maybe later wishing that you would have gone back and done things differently?
Yeah.
The second one is almost everything comes down to delayed gratification. And I was just sort of, I don't know, again, thinking about money, your career, like especially these two things, every single time it's like, do I want something now or am I okay waiting until later? It reminds me of the social experiment's kind of overused at this point, but where they put a bunch of kids in a room together, or actually, each kid is in a room individually, but they put like one tiny piece of chocolate in front of them. I just heard this. And they tell them, hey, if you wait for, I think it's something like 2 minutes and you haven't eaten it, then we'll give you 2 chocolates. And then when they come back, they say, hey, well, here's your 2 chocolates. Great job waiting. But if you wait another 2 or 3 minutes, we'll give you 2 more chocolates. And it's just so funny, like watching all these kids' reactions. Like they'll sniff it and they'll lick it and they'll, like inspect it and look at it because they want it so badly. But then they look back at these kids' lives 20, 30 years later. And every single time, the kid who could delay the gratification of just picking up the chocolate, and they had the patience to wait for when they had 8 chocolates, 16 chocolates, 100 chocolates, and were able to delay that gratification, ended up being more happy and wealthy, successful, on kind of all the benchmarks and stuff. But
yeah, I'm not sure where that was, but I just heard it again, and I think that's super interesting because it makes a lot of sense. Like, but it's also crazy to think like, the study other kids like 5 or 6, like they're young, right?
Yeah.
I've never actually like seen the videos
really
or like read about it, but I've heard about it. And I think it's just crazy. Like, dude, like that's in us as people. Like, from that young age, like those types of behavior and habits are formed, and it sticks with you. So
Yeah.
I think that's crazy.
Well, really tangibly, money, like the most fundamental thing that you can do about money is just to save more, or don't spend as much as you earn, right? It's kind of like, if you're not spending more, then you're at least saving something. But also thinking about, do I want to save this money and spend it on something else, or do I want to let it sit there and then save it later? And the reason why we do that is because kind of the world of opportunities, investment opportunities, they all reward long-term patience.
Yep.
The longer that you keep something in the stock market, the better it performs. The longer you hold on to a house, the more cash you produce from it and the more it depreciates. The longer that you save, like if you start saving at 20 rather than 40, the more your money can compound. Same thing with your career. Like, do you just hop to the next job because you're not happy with where you're at, or do you stick with it knowing that in the next year you have an opportunity for a promotion and you're in the right industry or in the right place, and you're just going to grind it out? Again, it all just comes down to, do I want something now or do I want it later? The third one is, you probably can't follow your dreams or do what you're passionate about.
I like this one.
It's like such a downer, but
it's
I'm
like a punch in the gut, but it's good.
Take that. And this was born from Chris Rock's advice for kids. And this is what he I think he did it maybe, it was like a middle school, elementary, I don't know. I forget what the context was, but he was literally talking to like kids under the age of 13 for sure. And he says, you can't be anything you want, but you can be anything you're good at as long as they're hiring. I thought that was so true. Like, let's just cut out the BS of you can do whatever you want. You can follow your dreams. You can do what you're passionate about. It's like, sure, but there has to be a real need for that. And I just thought it was funny, like, as long as they're hiring, well, like, yeah, that's very true, because otherwise, no one, sure, you can go like study, I don't know, the rock's nucleus and changes over time, but like, is that anyone going to pay you to do that?
Yeah.
If not, like, maybe you should find something else that you find a little less interesting, but still you're passionate about. But yeah, it's just funny. Like, I don't know. I struggle with that because it's like, what did God create you to do? And we'll get into this a little bit later, but really, jobs are jobs at the end of the day, and they're to make money. And it's not going to be the most like fantastic, dramatic thing. Sometimes.
Yeah, my dad used to always say to me, like, there's a reason why people get paid. Like, there's a reason why you're getting money to do this, Like, you may do something you don't really want to do, or it may not be like that fun, exciting, job that you would be looking for. And I feel like what his quote is so basic, but I've never heard it. But I think it's so cut and dry, but I like it a lot. I think it's super funny. Like, it's kind of funny to an extent.
Yeah.
I feel like right now for me, I'm in a spot to where I am doing what I want to do. And so I think if I wasn't, I think if I heard that, I'd be like, oh, like that sucks. Like, it would rub me the wrong way. Right now, it's a little entertaining, I guess, but I think it's super true. Yeah.
Well, I think it puts some perspective to.
I want to say, I feel like, but the point of this podcast is like to give hope, and I feel like, well, that's not the point, but that's part of it. I feel like this statement is very like takes away hope, and so it's kind of like, what do you? If you're someone that's hearing this right now and you're not doing what you want to do, like, then what? Like, what are we trying to communicate right now, I guess is my point.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at it more closely, like it kind of ends with the downer, but he says, you can't be anything you want. He says, but you can do, or you can be anything you're good at as long as they're hiring. So you can't be anything that you want. You can't, I couldn't go and be an NBA superstar, right? I couldn't go be a NASA astronaut. I couldn't, these are kind of extreme examples, but I probably also couldn't do what you're doing, because I just don't really like it that much. I'm not really good at putting my head down and lifting things all day, and like, it's just not that interesting to me. So I think it's good. He says you can't be anything you want, but you can do anything you're good at. Like, what are you good at? And if they're hiring for that, then like, sure, you can be whatever you want as long as you're good at it. I'm terrible at basketball. I'm terrible at math and science. I'm terrible at, putting tables together. But I'm good at other things, and they're hiring for it. So I can be anything. I can be any sort of tech marketer, or, et cetera.
Fancy stuff.
the fancy
You
stuff.
too good for my tables.
No, not at all.
Is that what you're saying, Corey?
Actually, I had a lot of fun when we did like the market lights and the
You did?
yeah.
Yeah, I took Corey on a job with me. That was fun because it was at the safari park. So
I've thought a few times like, you know what, if I just like if I entered the lottery like once and I just won and I just had like a crazy amount of money, I'd probably just go work for Jeremy for fun for free.
to get to the
Like
cool,
what would I do?
go
Yeah,
see the fun venues.
exactly. But like also have like a little bit of like sweat and
Yeah,
like a little bit of hard work.
I always tell my guys, hey, you're getting paid to work out,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. Anyways, on the same lines, this guy named Scott Galloway, who's in the tech world, I'm not going to go into it, but his advice is people who tell you to follow your passion are already rich. Which I thought was really interesting because
it's a really
it
good
kind
point.
of is true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of survivorship bias, which is when you're successful in some way, but then the way that you look back on it and advise others isn't actually reflective of your own experience. It's sort of a skewed, biased way of how you're looking at it and reflect on it. But again, going back to like, what do you do with this? Like, how is this constructive to your life? People who tell you to follow your passion are already rich. Well, it's like, you know what? They found a way to not necessarily follow their passion, but they found what they're good at and they found a way to make money out of it. And now they get to go do what they're passionate about. Or now they get to go, do other things. So there's a balance between those.
Yeah, I don't know if this is in your notes, but I was gonna say like I think it's a big part of it. Like Joanna, my sister, would always say it's not so much about like the job; it's more like the lifestyle. What it provides. And so like finding a job that allows you to like have the freedom or financial ability, whatever it is, to like do what you are passionate about, like in your spare time. Like I think it's a big way of looking at it.
Yeah. I think that's a nice segue into the fourth point here, which is that money does solve problems, just not all of them. Similarly, this is kind of survivorship bias too, but usually the people who tell you that money doesn't solve your problems, either one, have a lot of problems that just could never be solved with money, or they have tons of money and they've basically already solved their problems. I should say they already have a lot of money. And so they tell you that money's not going to solve all their problems, even though like a lot of their problems have already been solved with money, if that makes sense. I don't know. A lot of people that tell you, like I hear all the time from, tech entrepreneurs or venture capitalists or whatever about how money doesn't solve your problems. But when they're talking about problems, they're not talking about like poverty or fulfillment or providing for your family. They're talking about like your problems, like I'm having an affair with my coworker, or I like my problems of my drug addiction or my alcoholism, or basically like the vices and the sins. So it's sort of a scoop. Like you have to know who's giving the advice, because the reality is money can solve some problems. Like it can help people out of really tough financial situations. It can enable someone to go get an education or to pursue another career. It could be a life-saving amount of money to, get a surgery that you need or some sort of medical thing that you need. So the reality is, again, money does solve problems, just not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of the problems that you like named, like the affairs or like personal problems, like those are there whether you have money or not.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you think that money is going to fix all of those problems, like no, it won't. But I mean, I'm sure it could help with kind of like the practical examples you're giving. I've never heard that quote. You've always heard money doesn't solve your problems, and you've never heard the way that you're saying it right now.
Right.
I think you should publish this.
Thanks.
No, I think it's.
I'm just gonna take credit for it.
I'm just joking, but I think it's. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this way of looking at it kind of shows you like I don't know where I read this, but it was kind of talking about like we often like blindly follow what is always said or always done, and we don't really think about what we're doing. Was I talking about that with you or someone else? I don't know where I heard that.
I feel like we've talked about it before.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it. Like you just I don't know what some examples are, like okay, taking out a loan for 4-year education, or I don't know, buying a new car, I don't know, all these like just basic things of life that we just do because it's normal, but like we don't really think about like what's actually going on here. And I feel like this statement, like it's kind of like looking at it differently.
Yeah, well, exactly. If I had just thought my entire life money doesn't solve any of my problems and it's never going to fix anything,
then why would you be motivated? Like what like
yeah, exactly. Well, then I'm actually probably going to live really poorly and not be generous. And I'm actually probably going to be more of like a slave to money than anything. But if money solves some problems, just not all of them, and only certain types of problems, then you actually have a much more healthy view of money, in that it does solve some of your problems. And it's good to work towards that. And it's good that it can, because if money couldn't solve any of your problems, right, then it's like, wow, then what, I don't know, what do you do? Like there's so many different, it would be so much harder. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think like with this one, it's important to like if you found yourself thinking, okay, money's going to fix, X, Y, Z, like, well, really identify like what those problems really are, and I kind of look at like the root of what is causing it. I think it's like a quick like 2-minute analysis. You can figure out like, okay, is money actually going to fix this, or will it like lend itself like more towards the problem?
Yeah. I mean, if your problem, quote unquote, is that you don't feel fulfilled or you don't feel cool or like where you want to be in life, money's probably not going to solve that, because you're always going to want bigger and better things. You're always going to be chasing a bigger house or a new boat or a new car, whatever it is. But if your problem is that, your kids are starving and you want to be able to, I don't know, leave wealth to the next generation of your kids' kids, then it's like, yeah, that problem can be solved smartly.
I remember the book I'm reading right now is Rich Dad Poor Dad.
And, you've never read it before?
No, I've heard so much about it the last couple of
gosh.
years, and so finally, but you know what, I'm just gonna read it. It's been pretty good. But one of the things he was talking about is like we don't really consider like the actions that we take. We kind of just follow what people follow. And one thing he was talking about like on the subject of money is sorry, Max is going crazy right now. Max, chill, bro. Talks about like if you are in a mindset of if I just had more money, if I just made a little bit more money, and then they'll fix X, Y, Z. He said it's probably not gonna fix your problems, but he says if you like look at like let's say okay, so like of that way of thinking, probably the root problem is like your expenses, like it's your style of living. And so he said if rather than thinking, hey, if I made $100,000 a year versus $50,000 a year, he said instead like look at what do you spend money on, what expenses like do you have, and let's say instead like let's say you cut out XYZ of your expenses and then you made $100,000 a year, well then yeah, money might fix some of those problems. But if you're not looking at like the root issue being your expense, it's not going to help you. It's probably going to further your problems. And I feel like that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. It's funny that you're reading that book too.
Yeah, Jenny Steckler recommended it, so
yeah.
I was like, you know what, I'll read it.
Yeah, it's sort of outdated, and it's also you have to know like context of who he is and everything. But it's also really interesting, and it was one of the first books I read that kind of made me think about money and career differently. Fifth and final one is that your job can give you purpose, but your purpose doesn't have to be your job. And I feel like this one can be applied to Christians and non-Christians, just feeling like, what is my purpose in life? Do I want to be a pastor? Do I want to be a scientist? Do I want to be a stay-at-home mom? Basically, and I feel like maybe there's a little bit too much purpose wrapped up into your job. When, like we said before, your job at the end of the day is a job. You are paid for it. It's an occupation. It takes skill. It's likely being done for someone else for a purpose that you don't really care about. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have to give you purpose. It doesn't mean that you can't help people. It doesn't mean they can't fit into the greater scheme of God's plan for your life and what He wants to accomplish through you and how you are fulfilled as a person, the things that you care about. But again, it doesn't have to be your single source of purpose, right?
Yeah.
The thing that you like defines who you are.
Yeah. That reminds me, Nathan, my brother, I'm not sure who it was, but he talks about like a few like main historical figures like Ben Franklin, George Washington, some other like key figures. He said that like everything they accomplished was on top of like their normal job that they had to pay bills. I think it's a good reminder because you think of guys like that and like what they were able to accomplish, and I think it's easy to think like, oh, like that's just what they did. But the reality is, they had families, they had hobbies, they had like a means to pay the bills, and they still did all of that. And so I think it's a good just thing to think about. Like you can, dude, Max is going crazy. Max,
he's just straight up
all over me
you.
right now. It's so distracting. Where's my train of thought? Well, I think just the thought you're bringing up about like putting too much emphasis on like your job being your purpose. Well, like no, your job can provide for you, and then outside of that, you can live your purpose. And I think another thought I had was, okay, well then have a job for a while. You may not love it, but like focus on building wealth. Focus on like attaining like assets or just ways to earn money outside of your other job, and then you can move on to doing what you want to do like in your later years.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to all be, you have to have the best job and your only job, what you're supposed to do for your entire life, right? Again, there's seasons, there's different contexts you need to be in. We just want to encourage, people, and like, don't wrap up too much of yourself into your job, especially as guys. We can get really kind of integrated, right, with our job, and as who we are as a person that defines how we feel and what we do, and how other people, perceive us. What level am I? A manager? Am I a director? Am I moving up? Am I moving down?
Do I just move tables?
Do I just move tables? Yeah, but it can be a part of the grander scheme, and I think it's a really healthy maybe way to think about it is ultimately our purpose in life as human beings is to glorify God. Pretty much everything kind of levels up to that, is to glorify God in the way that we know and love Him, and the way that He knows and loves us. And then the way that kind of translates, and the way that happens, can be different for every single person in their occupation, the people that they are around and have relationships with, the things that they do, the ways that they give money and time, the organizations that they're involved in, the place that they live too. And it's not really that there's like a right or wrong purpose for anyone, because they all level up to the same purpose of glorifying God through the way that they love and know Him, and the way that He knows and loves us. So anyways, you don't have to put so much into your job. Your job can give you purpose, but your purpose doesn't have to be solely your job.
That's good.
Cool. Any closing thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say, like, because I feel like the majority of listeners right now are probably not, like, I think the majority of people aren't doing the job they want to do, And so I think I just wanted to say, like, that's probably you listening. I think your, like, end point just now about, like, glorifying God, like, that's really what it comes down to. That's really what matters. And so I think, I don't want this to be like a discouraging episode or like a cynical one, but I think, there are good thoughts, and I feel like overall I would say, like, keep your focus on what you're saying about, like, glorifying God, and especially like in your workplace and with those you're around daily, like, find ways to, like, to find purpose in that part of it, because there, that can be, if you're someone that you are around people constantly at your job, like, you have a huge opportunity that I don't have, that you don't have, Corey, to be a light and to be an encouragement and a source of truth. So.
Yeah. And also, like you said, if someone's not doing what they want to be doing, and they just, I know the feeling of constantly feeling like, okay, if once I get here, I'll be happy, or like, I can't wait to get to this place in my career or in my life or doing this job. Especially when you're in college and you just, like, you can't wait to graduate, and you feel like your life's going to be 100 times better knowing, that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. But it's encouraging also knowing, like, hey, like not so much needs to be wrapped up in this job, and you can find life and fulfillment and purpose in many other ways, not just in your job. So you don't have to put so much into just that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to leave us a rating and review. And we will talk to you next one.
See ya.